we can't stop hoping. We have to think that things can get better. Nebraska has a long history of being relatively nonpartisan.
We have such a rich history of doing what works in Nebraska, regardless of any political affiliation. I can identify myself in my politics. You can identify yourself in your politics, but we have this shared common goal.
Getting them in the room together. That is the most critical thing. You can't give them data because you give them all this data and they haven't trusted you first or built a relationship. They will not hear you. It's about trust.
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show, a podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Dan Parsons Show. I am your host, Dan Parsons. Coming up on today's show, a panel discussion about a national citizens group that is bringing together conservatives and liberals to try to understand one another better and to find common ground on controversial issues. Braver Angels was founded in 2016, just after the U.S. presidential election. The name Braver Angels is inspired by Abraham Lincoln's famous first inaugural address, in which he shares his hopeful vision for national unity. If you'd like to comment on today's show or any topic, send me an email directly at thedanparsonsshow@gmail.com. I promise I'll answer. Okay, here's my interview with Braver Angels. Enjoy. Well, one of the driving motivations to start this podcast, as I think most of our audience knows, and the radio show before it, is the hope that we can once again have a civil disagreements over policies and political philosophies. From the beginning, our themes have been lifting up instead of tearing down. What a unique concept. And truth over tribalism. Those are our themes of this podcast. Because I bet most of you can remember a time when you didn't dread going to the family reunion picnic because that one uncle was going to be there that insists on talking about politics, right? And how many of us, how many times over the past few years have we all wondered if we'll ever be able to break this toxic political atmosphere that we're in today? Well, I got some good news. You're not alone in those beliefs and hopes. Braver Angels is a national organization whose mission is to bring Americans together to bridge that partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. So with me today are three individuals who are working to organize a Nebraska alliance with that ambitious goal of bringing people together politically. Let me just introduce our panel and we'll get into this. Charlene Behrens is Professor Emeritus at the University of Nebraska Lincoln College of Journalism and Mass Communications. She's the author of two, not one, but two books about the Nebraska unicameral legislature. Charlene, welcome to the Dan Parsons Show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alan Klopek is the Rural Health Programs Manager for Civic Nebraska. Alan, it's a delight to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Ron McFarland, who is the regional lead for the Upper Midwest of Braver Angels. So Ron, welcome aboard.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be back in Nebraska.
Yes, sir. We were talking in the pregame about your football career and how you used to come here and bump shoulder pads with some Huskers. So
Yep.
You were an Iowa State Cyclone.
Yes, and that's where I live at right now. So we're neighbors, and then I also come through on my way back to Colorado because I lived in Colorado for 40 plus years.
Oh, nice.
So I always wave as I'm passing through.
Well, don't just wave. Stop and say hi. I'll buy you a cup of coffee.
Oh, that's super.
Well, Ron, maybe let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about this organization, Braver Angels, and your role.
Well, Braver Angels was started in 2016 in the wake of a divisive 2016 presidential election when Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah.
And it was founded by 3 individuals in Ohio. And they just saw that it began with a simple experiment, bringing 10 Trumpers and maybe 10 Clintons together in a room and discuss together about politics, but especially the polarization that exists in the United States. And so then they had what we call a workshop type atmosphere. And they started on their assumptions and their stereotypes. And they didn't go right together doing this, but they put them in separate rooms. What we call Republicans red, and then the Democrats blue. And they worked on, well, what do you think people think of you? They went through that type of thing. And then they said the same thing with the other group. And they came out with some common ground type of words. They found out that the language and everything like that was part of the problem that was having the issues and things going on. And especially they came up with media type involvement and all things of that nature. And so that's how we got started as far as the foundation of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so what's been your role, Ron, in that process?
And my role, well, believe it or not, I had just moved back to Ames, Iowa, and I was having a conflict with a family member, which is really one of my favorite nephews. And in a nutshell, he wrote in a email to me that I was going to, I hate to use the word eternal death, but that's basically what he said. And I wrote back to him and I said, I'm going to explain what eternal death means. And he sent me another email back, and he told me how much he loved me, but I was full of, you know what I'm talking about. Huh. And so from there, I was so upset. I went down and I just picked up the Ames Tribune, and it said, are you having family problems with politics? Join braveryangels.org and see what we have to offer. And I did. And since then, 2019, my role has been, I started an alliance in Ames, Iowa. And then because I'm very curious, I ended up being the Bravery Angels regional lead. And it goes on and on for the different roles. I'm in the ambassador program. I'm in the film club. I have many different hats that I wear, and it's all volunteer. And so that's basically how I got started. So
mm-hmm. A family story. And I guess I should have, as I introduced everyone, I'll let you do it as we go here. How do you identify then politically, Ron?
Oh, I'm a flaming red.
Nice.
With a smile.
There you go.
And I tell when people ask me that question, because I don't fit the stereotype a lot of times, so I tell them because of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass was a hero of mine as a kid. And I was about 10 years old. My father was big in African-American history, but he didn't tell me to read Frederick Douglass. I just, on my own, being curious, I found that I said, boy, we have conservative views. How come most of my family, I'm talking about 99.9, are Democrats? And so I was convinced early on at an age that it has to do more than just politics. It has to do with what I call now maybe tribalism and things of that nature. So anyway.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Charlene, you've written extensively about our unique, one-of-a-kind, nonpartisan unicameral and statesmen like the late Senator Jerry Warner, who was beloved by his colleagues from both political parties, from all political stripes. So I guess my question, Charlene, to get us started here for you, what hope exists for our nation to unite and at least slow down its current fragmentation from your perspective?
Well, we can't stop hoping. That's essential. We have to think that things can get better. Nebraska has a long history of being relatively nonpartisan. Not entirely, of course, but the fact that we did establish this nonpartisan legislature in 1934 by a vote of the people speaks to that idea. And early on, and really for many decades, the legislature worked hard, I think, to be nonpartisan in terms of how they interacted with each other, how they formed legislation. Much of the time, the legislation would form on the basis of geography, north of the Platte, south of the Platte. Maybe sometimes it's urban versus rural. Sometimes it's business versus less support for business. But it hasn't been historically purely partisan. They really took seriously the idea that this was going to be a nonpartisan experiment. In more recent years, that's changed. I think we've become far more partisan, even though we continue to elect senators without party labels behind their names. And even more importantly, I think we don't organize our legislature by party. So it's not like every other legislature in the country, which meets early in the term by party caucus, and then the party with the most votes elects the speaker and so forth as the leadership. This one doesn't do that. It still doesn't. And I think that does make a difference. We are a little less partisan. However, a number of years ago, we enacted term limits in this state and said that now legislators can have only 2 4-year terms, and then they have to step out. Now, a couple of them have come back after 4 years of being out of office and gotten elected again. But my point is that we have far less experience in the legislature than we used to. And so some of that leadership, some of that instruction and mentoring that senators were going to get about how we do things here just doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's been a real downside to term limits. So there's that. But then there's also just the national mood being what it is. That certainly filters down to politicians in our state, even though we still have this officially nonpartisan legislature. And I want to add, I still think that we're better off than most places in terms of how partisan the activities can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlene, how do you identify politically?
I am a blue.
All right.
I've done all my life, though. I mean, Ron gave you a little background. I grew up in a conservative Christian family. We paid attention to the news and to politics. We weren't actively involved in politics necessarily, but over time, my views changed, and that's been true long before the current situation. So, Ron says he's a flaming red. I'm a flaming blue.
I should, before we go on any further here, I should recognize Barbara Dewey, who has, I think, gotten most, if not all of us together in this project. And as this podcast has become more known, it won't surprise you that I get phone calls and texts and emails from politicians and other people that want to be on the show. And so I took a phone call a few months ago from this woman by the name of Barbara Dewey. And I didn't recognize her name. It was just a cold call. But Barbara wanted to tell me she's an ambassador for this, for Braver Angels, and just a passionate volunteer. And she recognized that I might be someone that could get excited about this movement that you're trying to start here in the state. And so, anyway, a shout out to Barbara. And just for transparency, I'll before I introduce Alan, I'll talk about my upbringing and my political persuasion. I also grew up a Republican in this state. My folks, I guess you could probably call them, moderate Republicans. They weren't. We went to church, but they weren't the religious persuasion of politics. And I remember my mom weeping when Richard Nixon resigned. And So they were, I guess, maybe Nixon Republicans, but they didn't like him that much after he got in trouble. Certainly a far cry from that today. So I've remained a Republican. I still am a Republican. I think most of my friends will tell me I was Rhino before it was cool to be Rhino. So, but anyway, so there's a long story of my background of how I went from, a very conservative Republican to now whatever I am today. But anyway, we all evolve. We all can change. We can all make up our minds. And I'm much more about individual policies and politicians and office holders than I am about political parties. But anyway, this ought to be fair for me to reveal who I am. Alan, Civic Nebraska has a rich tradition of supporting and building a more robust democracy for all Nebraskans. So maybe the similar question, what's your hope for this new organization in Nebraska?
Yeah, I think at the state level, we're really kind of going through like a crisis in like leadership and identity over what we're trying to accomplish with politics. Um, Obviously, like the discourse going on right now is only getting worse and kind of spreading downhill pretty quickly. So I guess what I'm hoping to get out of this is effective discourse on some of these topics we've been avoiding. We oftentimes talk about, difficult decisions, the uncle that you don't want to have the conversation with because of politics, but fortunately, we have to have those conversations. Just because we want to ignore it or push it to the side doesn't mean the problem's going to go away or not persist. So I'm really hoping this can be a voice for like a pragmatic prairie progressivism. As Charlene has mentioned so many times, that we have such a rich history of doing what works in Nebraska, regardless of any political affiliation. So I guess to me, that is kind of what I would like to see out of it, is a push towards I can identify myself in my politics, you can identify yourself in your politics, but we have this shared common goal, right? In my life in Nebraska, I've served on a variety of different boards, communities, programs. Originally, when I started getting involved in civic community-focused work, I ran a write-in campaign to get on my city council because of housing. When I say housing as an issue, I'm in a town of 1,200. Housing is an issue for a town of 1,200 and a town like Omaha of over 3 million. We have so many of these common issues, but we can't seem to agree on the language we even want to have to discuss these issues. Mm-hmm. So I'm really hoping Braver Angels provides us a way to discuss and move forward and get over some of these bumps in the road.
Yeah, well put. And Alan, can I presume you're our purple member?
I would like to say gray in that case. We'll say colorblind. I'm a proud independent. I've been on both sides of the aisle, raised very strongly Republican. And then around the time of Obama, started to believe in change, hoped for a 2016 sort of Democrat process. And to be honest with you, have for the last 3 years been a registered independent. I really don't see a place for myself in either party at this point.
Yeah. Well, for me anyway, in addition to the work I do in this state, I want to be able to have a voice at the ballot box. And I know a lot of people will change their registration back and forth from R to D or I to R or I to D in order to vote in our primaries. But that's one of the things that I've observed, that, if I want to have an impact and vote in primaries, I need to be on one of the teams. And so anyway, the system, and maybe that's a point of discussion here, maybe around the horn here. What are some of the barriers? And maybe let me ask it this way. What are some of the reactions you've had from people as you've begun to talk about forming this organization in Nebraska? Whoever wants to jump in.
I've told my friends about this, of course, and some of them are maybe not super enthusiastic, but yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think we should try to do something. Others are very skeptical. This is not true. How can you possibly? You'll never get people to come together. You'll never get conservatives and liberals to sit down and talk. Come on. And part of it is that don't know enough about Braver Angels to understand how this works. That there are skills to learn. There are means to this end. It's not like let's just dump these people in a room and let them fight it out, or let them love each other with no preparation and no experience at this. So it has not been completely positive, but it certainly hasn't been totally negative either. A number of folks I've talked to have come along to some of our events or said, "Add me to your mailing list," and so forth. So I'm encouraged, I guess.
I was encouraged. The first meeting that Barbara invited me to and walked in, I didn't know what to expect. Of course, I've known Charlene and I've known of Alan. I didn't know what to expect and walking into this room. It's like, oh my gosh, it was like old home week for me. There's this Republican I used to work with. Here's this Democrat that I used to go to lunch with. Here's this independent that I've done a project with before. And so for me, it was just a breath of fresh air to see all those people in the same room of people I consider friends who I've worked with politically in this state. And so, but yeah, Alan, Ron, other thoughts of your thoughts on what's the reaction to people when you tell them that this is the mission that you're pursuing?
Go ahead, Alan. I'll and then I'll come in.
You'll back clean up.
Yeah.
I think just myself having a history of switching politics and being a blue in a small town, I guess I thought it was going to be a little bit more combative, and that's what I was afraid of. Is it feels so often like we're so quick to put up these identities, I'm blue, I'm red, etc. But what I've really found is that, again, we have so much more in common on these issues than we think we do. Like, again, people, whether the size of the community or their background, they're all facing issues with housing, childcare, and affordability. And I think if we get down to it, the benefit of Braver Angels is it gives us a vocabulary and a language to have some of these conversations across this divide, right? And that's really the benefit it can offer people. And I know that's scary or intimidating at first to get out of your comfort zone or interact with people that you're not used to. But if we're going to solve these problems, that's what it's going to take.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll chime in on it because I am the regional lead and I get in a lot of states and I speak to a lot of people. It's the same type of thing what Charlene has said and Alan. I mean, the same thing. They're apprehensive. They said, well, this is not going to work. You're not going to get people in there to talk and this and that. And then the thought process all the time, when you have a group like this or an organization like this, they think you need to go out with signs. They think you need to go out with physical. And I try to reassure them the action piece is getting them in the room together. That is the most critical thing. And then if they can learn a simple skill, what I call LAP, listen, acknowledge, learn how to pivot and give your perspective, then they start getting the idea. But just like was mentioned earlier about our workshops, our videos, it's everything is research based because one of the founders is Bill Doherty, and he's in Minnesota. And he's a professor and he's a clinician. And he developed these workshops scientifically for families that are having problems or anybody having problems. And he's put them in a style for common people. And he understands it's about trust. And once you build a relationship, you can't give them data because you give them all this data and they haven't trusted you first or built a relationship. They will not hear you. And once we've gotten over that about, oh, I see Jim over there. He's a conservative and I'm a Democrat. And then you go, well, maybe this type of thing might work. So that's part of it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good, Ron.
Mm-hmm.
I'll direct this to Charlene, but hopefully everyone will chime in because I know you have opinions of this. But, I've spent my entire career shaping messages. For office holders, people I'm trying to get elected. And now I'm doing it for myself, I guess, on this podcast. But we all know what social media has done to the fabric of our culture. Most of it we think of as negative. I still think it's a tool that, I don't know if you can manage it, but certainly it can be used for good, right? And I use it every day. You're going to see your smiling faces across TikTok and Instagram and all of those things once we produce this podcast. But I think most people will answer the question of what are some of the barriers of breaking down this division within our country, and it comes back to social media. So maybe starting with Charlene, how do we deal with this new media that is really attributed a lot to the divisions within our country?
Oh boy, if I had that answer, Dan, we'd patent that. But we can't pretend it's not there. We can't hope it goes away, because it won't. Just as every other new method of communications that has come along, it has ups and downs. Nothing's completely wonderful, or usually not completely horrible either. So let's look at how we can use this for good. And what you're doing is certainly an example of that. You're trying to use all the means available to get the word out to people that you can talk to each other. You can be a moderate. You can certainly stand up for what you think is right, but do it in a way that is productive rather than destructive. And I think that I have a feeling that there will be some restrictions on social media for children, at least, and that may be just a compromise that the nation comes to ultimately, because it's shown to be damaging to children more than to adults. But certainly adults have used it for nefarious purposes also. But we can use it for good. We can use it to spread a message of reason and cooperation and responsibility, I think.
Yeah, well put. Alan, I know Civic Nebraska is a vibrant communication hub across this state. Your thoughts on social media?
Yeah, I think social media, as long as it's used authentically and like earnestly, can really have some positive effects. You can really connect with people across the world and make impacts and conversations that you wouldn't normally have. But also it can be used so much for damaging relationships. I hate to know the extent of AI and misinformation and what that will do to the conversations this coming Thanksgiving. I not looking forward to that.
Yeah. Ron, your thoughts?
Well, my thought is old school. And it reminds me of a movie, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And so I love technology. I love, because I taught technology as a high school teacher, middle school, elementary, but I also had that one eye open, one eye closed because of the ugliness. And I have friends that just love AI, but then they start telling me the ugly piece of it, or they love social media because it's like an open forum, and you can just say whatever you want to say, and nobody can see me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you use it in a good way, and I hope they figure that out. Whereas I like the human experience, where I can touch them, I can see their expressions and that type of thing. Maybe that's good, but right now I'm geared toward the ugly piece. I get on social media, but only because I share some of my faith. I share the positive things. A lot of times I don't read a lot of the things that my friends go back and forth and say, but I do send them happy birthday wishes. So that is my thought process.
Yeah. Well, as someone who was trained as a journalist, and now I guess I'm kind of what I am doing now. I started reading the newspaper when I was 10 years old. That's how I got into this business of what I'm doing today. And so I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of students and young people and organizations through the years. and trying to encourage, no matter where you're at or who you are or what you do, to seek out different sources of news.
Yes.
And I understand that's more and more difficult because we have fewer and fewer what I call traditional journalism. And so that's why people like me and everybody that has a microphone and a computer now is exploring and experimenting with this new technology of podcasting. We saw the last election, the last presidential election, the podcast election. And so I encourage, I watch Fox News, not on a regular basis, but I'll tune in just to see what the hell's going on over there. And MSNBC, kind of on the other end of the spectrum. But I also read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and my local media, absorbing all of that. And so anyway, I just think that needs to continue to be the emphasis of, first of all, real journalists and people who are seeking out facts. That's, again, one of the themes on here. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, I don't want to cut this conversation short. We can go long, but maybe talk a little bit, whoever wants to, of what are the next steps with this organization, and then a follow-up question of how can people get involved? Whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I see it as Nebraska, since the state is so huge. And I think some of the new members for the new alliance, they had talked about being a super alliance in Nebraska. And the reason why I say that geographically, if they became a super alliance, then they could use some of the things, well, we just talked about social media, but they could use Zoom, and then they could spread the message across the whole state, because we do have an emphasis on alliances, but the emphasis in my point of view is not so much the alliance, but the message of what we're trying to bring to Nebraska and to the world and to the United States, so to speak. And so if they could, which they've already done, they formed a team where they can get on Zoom, and then they can do it in some of the criteria that Brave Angels require, like moderators, participant meeting, or the technology piece. And it's just like putting on a show, like a broadcast. And so they can bring these difficult topics to someone way in Council, you know what I mean? Council Bluff, the far part, or even in Lincoln or Omaha. I don't have to worry about building an alliance.
I think maybe you meant Scotts Bluff.
Scotts Bluff. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Council Bluffs, those people across the river in Iowa. It's one of those Iowa folks.
I forget they were talking about a flood. It becomes part of Nebraska sometime. I don't know. But yeah, that's what I meant. And so that's how I see some of the things that Nebraska's new alliance. And I love the name that they're going to do it. Maybe Alan and Charlie could talk about.
Are we going to unveil that today? Hey, make a little news here on the Dan Parsons Show?
It's we kind of talked about it a little bit. But anyway.
Alan, you've taken on the leadership role of Braver Angel State Coordinator. What's next?
Yeah, so I guess I would say, if what you've heard today has related to you, if you have a frustration with how we talk about politics and how we work together to go through these issues of politics, I would reach out on braverangels.org, and there's a way for you to sign up to get further introduced. As previously mentioned by Dan and Ron, we are working towards getting a state alliance going. That should be going here shortly. I will, I guess, tentatively leak the name, because I think it's important to talk about our history on the state level. So that would be the George Norris Alliance for a Better Nebraska. It really gives us a lot to shoot for.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm encouraged after that conversation. I hope you are as well. Let me know what you think of this idea. Leave a comment on our YouTube page. We'd really appreciate it. Hey, thanks to the Parsons team who made this show possible. Chase Porter, our executive producer. Ike Samanis, producer and graphic design. Penology Tech Solutions for their technical help and equipment. Kim Remington, Parsons PR's Director of Operations. And thanks to each of you for your support. It means the world to me. Okay, that's the show. Thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.